emergency shelters and doing a host of other measures to get migrants out of the country and keep them out. Does France have a lesson for America's own migration issues? David Tafuri is a former State Department official and advised the Obama campaign on foreign policy. David, it's always interesting to see how countries that have reputations as being more liberal and progressive deal with some of these issues. France expels 1 in 5 illegal immigrants. If Trump did that, he would literally be Hitler, even more literally Hitler than he already literally is, wouldn't he? 1 in 5 illegal immigrants get expelled from France.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that characterization, but you're right. Macron is doing some interesting things with respect to migration policy in France, and these are things that France needs to do. Here's some of the things it's doing. As you mentioned, it's getting some of the migrants off the streets, but it's trying to get some of them into shelters. It is also setting up centers in Africa for those who are asylum seekers to be identified and observed and chosen from Africa so that they know before they go to France whether they're going to get asylum or not. That's also very important for limiting those who are going to go expecting to get asylum and not get asylum. But one of the most important things that Macron is doing is he's distinguishing between economic migrants and political asylum seekers, or those who are refugees that meet the standard for refugee, meaning they have a well-founded fear or of death or injury if they're returned to their country of origin. And he's accepting asylum seekers, true refugees, and he said France is still open for refugees, whereas economic migrants he's trying to discourage from coming to France. And that's something that we can learn as well. It's something we should be doing, but President Trump has not made that distinction in his policy thus far.
Well, no, because everyone knows that the refugee system and that status of a genuine fear of persecution is abused routinely in the immigration systems of the West. France is, if you go to Paris, for example, and you can go a couple of blocks from the best hotels, the Georges V or the Plaza Athénée, and you would think you were in a country and a city that has fallen apart. A beautiful city with streets piled with trash. The jungle camp at Calais that they shut down has basically moved to the capital city now. Is this not a warning of what happens when essentially you have let anybody who can walk into your country stay in your country?
Well, that's why Macron is doing some of the things that he's doing. He's trying to make the streets safer. He's also trying to make it safer for some of these migrants by moving them off the streets and moving them into shelters. But I want to go back to one other characterization you mentioned, which I don't agree with. Asylum seekers in the U.S. are not problematic. Actually, the refugees who have come to the U.S. and have been resettled here as refugees have not engaged in crime. Their crime rate is less than the average American, and they've not engaged in terrorism. None of the major terrorist attacks. Well, hold on a second. None of the major terrorist attacks in the U.S. have been due to refugees. They're from people who came to the U.S. in other ways.
No, what about the Somalis in Minnesota, for example, who go back to Somalia? They supposedly here because it's unsafe for them to go back to Somalia, but they fly back to Somalia, strap on the old suicide belt, and your State Department pays to have the 50,000 fragments of whatever's left of them shipped back for burial in Minnesota.
Mark, you got to look at the statistics. I mean, you can pull out one, crazy situation. But if you look at the statistics, asylum seekers and refugees in the United States have not engaged in crime, and they have not engaged in terrorism. And it's because our asylum process has a very substantial vetting procedure. They're vetted overseas. It takes 2 years for them to go through that vetting process. They're interrogated. They go through questioning and background checks. And by the time they make it here through that difficult process, they normally are law-abiding citizens who contribute to our society. Now, I agree with you, though, that we have to do a better job of limiting those who come from overseas who do engage in terrorist attacks, and there are many who have done that, but they have not come as refugees. They've come through other ways. They've come on visitation visas. They've come on family visas. They've come through other means, and those are the ones that we should be more focused upon.
Well, what's the answer to that? Because if you look at the situation migration of Europe to Africa, it's actually more severe than North America to South America. Because if you look at the differential in birth rates, a very tiny proportion of the population of Africa, countries where people have 6, 7 children, and they can't support the present population, the incentive to just get on a boat and, as Tucker showed on this show a couple of months ago, just arrive on a beach in Spain where all the nice continentals are sunbathing topless and walk into Europe. What's to prevent people from just walking into the developed world and overwhelming it?
You know, I've read some of your articles on the aging statistics that you mentioned, and they are very interesting and thoughtful. And I think you make some good points there. One of the ways, though, we stop migration from Africa to Europe, as you mentioned, is to set up these centers in Africa. So there are staging centers there where people can apply, and they'll know whether they're going to be given refugee status or not. But ultimately, we also have to do more to turn these countries that are becoming failed states into more stable, prosperous countries, so people do not want to leave them. That's going to take a lot more engagement by Europe. Europe is not doing enough in Africa to stabilize these countries.
Europe used to do enough, and it's called colonialism and imperialism. And it's actually very hard, isn't it, to do it at one remove by just giving money to international aid and development things.
Well, that's not just what I'm talking about. And obviously, there's something in between colonialism and zero engagement. We have to be engaged. We have to be promoting democracy. We have to be promoting economic prosperity. And we have to make these countries safe and prosperous and stable so the people stay there and they don't seek illegal migration.
Thanks for coming on, David. We'll try and find where that sweet spot is.
David Wall. He's an attorney and conservative commentator. And Richard Fowler. He's a nationally syndicated radio talk show host and Fox News contributor. So good to have you guys here. David, I'm starting with you.
Trish.
You know, it just seems kind of obvious. I'm all for people coming here that want to work hard, that want to contribute, that want to be Americans and be an American. I mean, this is a basic part of immigration, you would think, and yet we've got lottery systems and chain migration, and I don't know if we're putting our best interests first. Am I right?
Yeah. I mean, it's quite incredible when you think about it, Trish. You know, how about we get a say in who comes into our country, who legally immigrates into our country, and what we do with illegal immigrants. The good news with Mr. Trump, by the way, is we just found out today that the apprehensions of the worst, the MS-13 gang members and other violent gang members, is up 83% over last year. So those are the people Mr. Trump said he was focusing on, and that's precisely what he's doing. The apprehension, the prosecution, and the deportation. Now, DACA's coming up. We all know that in the next 3 to 6 months, Democrats desperately want legal status for up to 800,000 of these immigrants who came here as children. But in exchange for that, Mr. Trump is going to get a big deal. He's going to get funding for the wall. He's going to get an end to chain migration, as you said. He's going to get merit-based migration, which means the best and the smartest, the most educated people come to America first. And by the way, there are plenty of those people from all over the world.
Absolutely.
So Trump's got it going on. He knows what he wants to do, and he's going to get it done.
Richard?
I think it's hard to say what's going to be in this deal. I think it is very true that we will see DACA get done in the new year, and I think that's because Democrats have pushed for it. And the reason why we're having this debate is because the president ended DACA irresponsibly, and so now we're having this conversation. I don't know if we'll end chain migration, and let's remember who chain migration has benefited. Remember, the Trump family came here under chain migration, and so did Melania's family. They also came here under chain migration. So chain migration is a program that has allowed for this country to thrive, right? Because we are a nation of laws, and we can all agree on that. But as you said at the beginning of the segment, Trish, we're also a nation of immigrants, and that's what makes America great. Is because we have all these people that come here with their culture, with their ideals, and they're allowed to open up businesses, create companies, and be part of the American dream. People like Albert Einstein.
I hear you, but you know, by the way, David, we're in a different place than we were 100 years ago, or even 60 years ago, for that matter.
We got people that are coming here specifically to kill us, and that's a big problem. We can no longer say, well, you can bring your aunt, your uncle, and your cousins and your kids over because they're related to you. We just can't do that anymore.
David,
the world has been under siege with violent terrorists from the Middle East, and that's why, by the way, Mr. Trump's extreme vetting is taking place. That's why the travel ban is taking place from certain countries, because he's the first guy that has said from the White House that you know, political correctness is no longer going to be my guiding tool. I'm going to do what's right for America. We are going to be safe, and I'm going to do whatever it takes, and those are three of the tools he's going to use.
A couple points on that. Point number one, Barack Obama has, in his last year as president, deported more people than Donald Trump did in his first year as president, number one. Number two, this ideal that painting all immigrants as trying to kill us, I think, is absurd. For you to come into this country,
I didn't say all.
Excuse me.
I didn't say all.
For you to come to.
I said a lot.
Well, a lot, I think, is absurd, right? For you to come to this country and to
you didn't tell that to the people in San Bernardino. You didn't tell that to the people in New York, in Atlanta.
You are pointing at one or two or three different cases. 99.9% of the individuals that come to this country, they work really hard. Most of them work 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 jobs to make ends meet for their families, and all they want to do is pursue the American dream. And this ideal that you say a lot paints all these immigrants with a broad brush, and that's wrong.
But I think what we're talking about here, Richard, is reforming the system so that those people that are working 3 or 4 jobs and want to embrace everything that's great about this country, so that they can come here. Because sure,
Trish,
we do need them, and we want them, and we don't want to turn people away that want to embrace and help all of us. But maybe we need to be more selective.
Richard is correct on that issue. And by the way, Democrats who said that Mr. Trump would send ICE out to individual homes and raid them and deport people en masse, obviously he's not doing that because he has deported less people, 50,000 or so, than Barack Obama did last year.
But here's the thing, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't say that, oh, President Trump is way better on border security, he's way better on immigration, when President Obama was actually better on border security and better immigration than President Trump is. So you can't have your cake and eat it too.
Richard. He caught people and released them.
He deported more people than Donald Trump did.
You know what? But that doesn't even matter at this point. What matters is that we fix this for the future.
I agree.
So that we do not have people coming here that can't take care of themselves, that can't support themselves, that become a drain on the system.
And
we don't want people that.
And we've tried to fix it over and over again. And once again, Republicans stood in the way. There was immigration reform on the floor 4 years ago, and Republicans blocked it.
Well,
and it's going to get passed now. We got 3 months to do it.
You guys had to change your heart, David?
All right, good to see you both.